First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Here at the Fox 12 Oregon Newsroom, I'm Greg Nippler. This is Fox 12 Now. Something that seems to be a fairly frequent occurrence happening every year is a cyanobacteria or algae bloom of some kind that happens around Ross Island. It's something that we're familiar with, but now there is another one that is occurring. And we're going to find out more about that and what makes this maybe even just a little bit more unique than some of those other ones that we've had before. To do so, joining us from Oregon State University, we have Professor Desiree Tullos, who's here with us. And thank you very much for joining and joining us here to talk about this, to go over what's happening down there. Before we get into all of that, would you mind telling us just a little bit about yourself and your studies there at Oregon State University?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Greg. My name is Desiree Tullos. I'm a professor of water resources engineering at Oregon State University, and I've been working down at the Ross Island Lagoon for almost a decade. We've been out there collecting samples and developing a bunch of computer simulation models to try to understand what drives the bloom and then what some feasible and sustainable solutions are to try to mitigate it or kind of knock that cyanobacteria back.
Yeah, it does seem like it's something that we end up talking about, quite frequently. If you've been there for 10 years, studying this to try to figure out what's going on. When we get down to it, what is it about that area that makes it such a hot spot for this to where we have these frequent outbreaks?
Well, cyanobacteria need three things. They need stagnant water, they need excess nutrients, and they need warm water. And so the Willamette River is, it's got some excess nutrients in it. It's getting warmer over time. As the air temperature's warm, the rivers are getting warmer. And then the sort of key ingredient, the secret sauce unfortunately for Ross Island Lagoon, is that stagnant water. And that's really just prime habitat for cyanobacteria.
And is that just because it has that lagoon there, essentially, where the water just gets in there and does not flush itself out?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the tide comes in there twice a day, but it really kind of just gently slides across the surface and unfortunately kind of grabs the cyanobacteria cells and drags them out into the main stem river. But it's really not mixing, and it's really just created these conditions that cyanobacteria really like.
What are some of the big concerns that come along with this kind of bacteria?
Well, so they can produce toxins that can make people and dogs sick, and they can have ecosystem level impacts. Like these are images that were collected on Friday, and what we're referring to is sort of a mega bloom this year. It's pretty severe, and when that bloom sort of dies, it releases toxins, but it can also suck the oxygen out of the water. We've been seeing sturgeon jumping. There's eagles fishing out there. So the pH is over 10, so it's really not good habitat for the organisms that live in the lagoon. And then it can make people sick, and and kill dogs. And there's a sort of broader thing that I think we should pay attention to as well, which is people's perception of the river. Is it a wasteland, industrial wasteland, or is it something that we want to protect and utilize as a broader sort of community? And so I think there's a bunch of levels in which environmental and human health are at risk.
When we're talking about those things going on there, just this might be going back just a little bit to clarify some of these terms. So we said algae, bacteria, cyanobacteria. Could you give us kind of a definition of exactly what it is there, or do all of those kind of apply?
Yeah, they are cyanobacteria. We often refer to them as blue-green algae, but they're not actually algae, they're cyanobacteria. And that's sort of just a really in the weeds definition, sort of from a microbiology perspective. They are these organisms that live there. They belong here. That's how we have oxygen in the atmosphere. Cyanobacteria are one of the first organisms that sort of existed on Earth, and they created this oxygenated atmosphere that we enjoy as humans, that we need. But we've created conditions where they outcompete the other sort of more desirable things that live in the river and create, as you can see in this image, these conditions that lead to toxins, lead to replacement of the sort of what we think of as the good guys, or the desirable cyanobacteria, and turn the river fluorescent green. And these little balls of floating that you're seeing right here are a bunch of colonies. This is the first time I've seen this out there, but these big sort of they're called colonies, where a bunch of cyanobacteria kind of get glued together. And that happens when they start to get stressed, like sort of right before the bloom starts to collapse and starts to die. And so what happens over the next couple of weeks is going to be really interesting and important to watch. I know DEQ is out there sampling today to test the toxins And so what happens over the next week or two, I think is going to be really important to watch.
When we're watching this, was that you? I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Going in there, I'm like, that's what you're not supposed to do, right? If you're an ordinary person going into the blooms like that.
I wouldn't recommend it. It's pretty gross out there right now.
Yeah, it definitely looks gross. When what is there a particular? I mean, you mentioned some of these different things that are all coming together as far as the different ways that these blooms occur. But you mentioned that this one just being such a big one. Is there any like one particular factor, or it's just all those right ingredients that are happening right now to make this such a big one?
Yeah, well, I mean, this year, it's the worst year I've seen it. And I think there's a couple of things that converge this year to make it sort of what we're referring to as the mega bloom. And one is that, we didn't have much of a winter. We had some rain in December, but we really didn't get any snowpack. So the river was already hot by May. We were seeing July temperatures already in May. So the river was hot early. There wasn't a lot of flow in the river. So those already are conditions to really drive a bloom. And then this year, raw sand, sand, and gravel did with, put a curtain across the entrance to the lagoon. And the goal for that was to try to help trap or contain some of that material in the lagoon. And I think it had some benefit to that regard, but it also, I think, reduced the circulation or the sort of movement of water, which is better for cyanobacteria. So I think it might have helped trap some of that material in the lagoon, but also maybe made the conditions better for cyanobacteria to grow. So we were already expecting a big bloom year just because it was a sort of low winter, hot water was hot. And then by trapping that material in the lagoon, I think it made the bloom inside the lagoon worse.
What can be done to combat this right now as it is with these blooms? Is there any way that we can, I don't know if there's a chemical process or something that you could do to break it up, or is it we just have to let it run its course?
For this year, I think there's not a whole lot that we can do at this point. Earlier in the season, if we had sort of started paying attention to this and really taking action early on, you may have remembered when the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. had that algal bloom. They were dumping like bottles of hydrogen peroxide into the lagoon, into the pool. That's something that would also probably be effective at Ross Island Lagoon. It's not cheap and it's temporary, but I think if we had started that process earlier in the season and had the resources to do it, that could have been effective at knocking back this particular bloom. But at this point, I think it's there's not a whole lot we can do. But over the long term, we have identified a really obvious solution. If you're spending time out there, it didn't used to be this stagnant sort of pool in the middle of the river. There were multiple islands there. And so we have shown through a lot of engineering and analysis that if we just reconnect that pool, that big lagoon to the river, and let flushing flows come back through there, that it can really significantly reduce the cyanobacteria. So over the long term, that's really what we're advocating, is to reconnect the lagoon with the river so it can act like a river again instead of like a reservoir.
Would that be just as simple as digging out, one section there so that the water can flow through?
Well, simple is one way to think about it. I think it's a pretty complicated process. There's a lot of interest in the lagoon and a lot of different priorities for what people are trying to do out there. And, there's an environmental permitting process. So it's not a simple project. I think the solution on the surface is simple, but getting to the actual construction, involves finding someone to pay for it and take responsibility for it. So I think the project is broadly more complex, but the solution is sort of obvious and simple.
Is there any hope of that project coming to fruition? Is there are there any steps being made toward that?
We'll see. I'm working with Representative Noss. He's been a great ally in helping. He's really motivated to help try to figure out how to address the bloom. And so we're working together with putting together some legislation to finish the design and get environmental permitting process. But still after that, there's a need to identify who's sort of going to take the lead on it from a construction and cost perspective. And so we're working with a bunch of different parties. The new Water Resources Development Act is something that happens at the national scale. Congress has approved some language around that to encourage that mandates the Army Corps of Engineers to get involved. And so I think there's a lot of motion and movement around it. We'll have to wait and see sort of how those directions play out.
All right. Well, Professor, thank you very much for joining us here, to talk about this a little bit more and to go through some of these details. Anything else that you think is important for people to know?
I just think I would reiterate how important it is for folks to stay connected to the river. It is a great resource that we have, and even though it might look right now like it's not a great place to spend time or be, it is still an important resource. I don't want us to turn our backs on it. I think instead we should sort of turn towards it. Let your legislators know this is important to you. Because I think as a community together, we can solve this problem. We've got a really obvious solution, but we really have to work together as a community. And so I'd hate for people to see these images and be like, well, I'm going to just stay away from the river. I think instead I would encourage people to sort of turn towards it and engage.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here with us on Fox 12 Now.
Thank you, Greg.
And for everybody watching, we are live here out of the newsroom, so we really appreciate it. We'll be here all the way until our 4 p.m. news, covering a wide range of topics like we just did right there. Coming up next, we'll have our meteorologist, Michael Fecca, on to talk about, give us an extended weather forecast, really, and to take a look at what's going to be happening there. So that's up next, and plenty more. So we'll be right back after these few minutes for a break. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now. Thank you very much.